Anyone, whoever feels like they can do that.
Hello, my name is Diler. I'm from Iraq, originally northern Iraq. I'm a senior and I'm majoring in international political economy, and I'm taking this class as a part of that. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Nicole again. This is my face. Nice to meet you, and we're looking forward to having you today.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Macy. I'm a senior here. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely.
Hello, my name is Jacob. I am the jokester of the North Africa and Middle East class, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'm Lorena. I'm a junior. I'm from Guatemala, and I'm also an international political economy major.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Max. I'm a history major. I'm from here in Idaho, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tigran. I'm a history major, minoring in political economy. Looking forward to hear from you today.
Thank you.
My name is Majima Disabe, and I'm a freshman, and I'm looking forward to learn a couple new things.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Liliana Martinez. I'm a freshman here, and I'm interested in studying international political economy with Spanish, and I'm excited to hear your talk.
Thank you.
I'm Ashlyn. I'm a senior here. I'm majoring in international political economy, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Henna. I'm a double major in international political economy and marketing and digital media, and I'm taking this class as my last fun class before I graduate. And thank you for coming and teaching us today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Imad Ahmed Spahic. I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina, senior, double majoring in political economy and marketing. And yeah, this is also my international law is my last requirement. So thank you.
So, just if you could hold, one of the things that we'll be talking about is the use of force, and it might come up later on that we talk about the conflict in the Baltics sometime that I think that happened in the 1990s. I hope you don't mind in filling us in there when it comes to that.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to.
Do
you have any more?
Do we have any other?
I'm
in Dr. Cordera's POE class, and I'm excited to learn about international law today as someone outside of the international law class. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hey, my name is Mats. I'm doing a minor in political economy, and I'm from Germany and a freshman.
Fantastic. Where in Germany?
From Stuttgart, so in the south.
Oh, Stuttgart. I've been to Germany. Beautiful country. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Shoshanik from Armenia, and I'm at Dr. Kadero's POE class, and I'm excited to join this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So, do we have anybody else? I don't want to leave out anyone. I wasn't counting. I should have been counting. I learned counting in elementary school, and that's where I left it. I should have been counting. So when you go to law, it seems sometimes you forget about mathematics, and probably the same holds for those who go to do political economy and international relations. So anyway, I hope we have had the opportunity to meet each one of you. Is there anybody still not yet introduced? It looks like we've introduced everyone. And please, when you get to talk, you can leave on your you can let your video flow, or you can just talk without it, however you feel inclined. So I just also want to mention that I lived for 5 years in Meridian, Idaho, And I was teaching as in fact Nicole introduced me, I was teaching at Concordia University School of Law right there in Boise. And I want to indicate that I'll be coming back to Boise. In June, I'll be teaching at the University of Idaho College of Law. The campus is right there located in Boise. So I'm looking forward to getting back to what I call my home. So I can't wait to do that come June. So here we have a little bit of conversation. It's not going to be a long conversation. Unfortunately, we cannot cover all of international law in just under 1 hour. But I'll give you an idea of what I usually do when I teach international law. I do teach a couple of other courses as well. I teach contracts, I teach torts, I teach secure transactions, I teach basic corporate law, agency and partnership, I teach international business transactions, and a few other courses that I teach. But when I do teach international law, I love to ask students to tell me what they think about international law. What do you think it really is about? And don't you hold it back. No answer is incorrect. They are all correct because they come from you. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I would definitely start off by saying that it's quite imperfect, and I think we've talked about the complications of kind of having to wait for a precedent to happen in international law when it comes to interpreting cases, and like specifically talking about the ICJ and how it sometimes might be very conflicting, the decisions that they make, and it's kind of like they find themselves in a place where without a similar thing happening before, they kind of don't know how to interpret it. So while I definitely see the use of international law in an anarchical system that we live in, it's very, very complicated to navigate it.
Yes, that goes to enforcement.
Ever. 15 minutes. Yeah. I can go ahead. Oh, someone go.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. When I look to international law, I have a more sort of positivistic, instrumental look to it. I think it provides us with some good instruments to mitigate the range of conflicts that we have in the international system between different actors. And I think that's what makes it essential. As Hannah mentioned, it is imperfect and still got its problems, but it's good to have those instruments out there that can mitigate those conflicts out of just war and other violent means.
Yeah, I agree. It's not perfect, but like you said, it is also agreed upon by nations when they make treaties, in which case it's backed by what is called positive law, which you referred to. But they agree upon these norms, and the reason they do that is because we have to live together as a community of nations, even though an imperfect community of nations. Anybody else wants to contribute to your understanding or understanding of international law?
Yeah. So I mean, you asked what the international law is about, and
yeah,
in the simplest way, I feel like I would put it is that it's about the balance of power, and it's about maintaining that balance of power across the globe. Because when that's when the balance of power gets shaken is usually when we see the violations of international law, whether it's on a regional or a continental or even global level.
That's good, especially as it relates to the use of force, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm not commenting a lot because I want you to be able to speak, because I'm going to speak the rest of the class. Hopefully, you'll be able to contribute even there. But please go ahead and tell me what your view of international law is.
I think, can I go ahead again if there's
yeah,
no one? I think,
just go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think one more element of international law that I look to it more critically is also it sustains in some ways the status quo and the way that the colonial project has shaped the world. That's sort of the problematic side of it for me. It sustained the nation state system and it's rounded around that. and maybe that produces some of its imperfections too.
That's true. That's correct. So it is premised on the notion of nation states, and that probably contributes to the imperfections. Yes. Go ahead. Anybody else, please?
I'm sorry, I
All right.
didn't raise. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I'm sorry I didn't raise my hand, but I was just thinking of these videos that we were assigned by Professor Cordero to watch today. And I think one of the videos kind of tried to push back against this positivist and instrumentalist view of it, and tried to say that maybe in practice, international law is kind of being used as just another tool for different powerful actors to use. But I think ideally, it's like it embodies a set of relationships and embodies these norms that we have as an international system, and should help mitigate those conflicts as best we can. But of course, we all know that doesn't always happen the way it should. So.
Yeah, and in any event, perhaps to a lesser extent, at the national level too, enforcement can be difficult, and even the laws that we have, even at the domestic law, are not always perfect. Although, of course, we have a better system domestically. So, anybody else, any comments? I don't want to cut anybody off.
I believe international law is just all about preventing previous issues from happening again. For example, League of Nations, and then UN came to place, and then there are some territorial organizations that are there to kind of improve the lifestyle, improve it, like by helping each other. That's what I see international law as being for.
Yeah. So particularly now, with the conflict we are having in, not only one but several, you have to wonder whether even the current system of the United Nations is working perfectly. One of the aggressors, I'm talking about the conflict in eastern Ukraine. I don't know what you think about that, but if you see one of the actors as an aggressor, they also happen to sit at the UN Council, the United Nations Security Council. So it's not perfect, even though they thought there would be an improvement on the League of Nations. Even there, it's not that perfect. What else? What else do you guys have?
I personally will say that international law also have to do like a set of custom rules that is there to trying to keep some order in an anarchic system. But as others have said, that's not perfect because there's certain actors between international law that have grown some power over it and are the ones that set it up. So it's really difficult for other states to contest those views because as we talk about precedents, it's difficult for them to overcome that precedent when the other states are not willing to change this.
Yeah, and one of your colleagues talked about precedent. Of course, the ICJ and several international courts do not have precedent. And one of the reasons for that is that some of the norms of international law are derived from the civil law. The civil law does not have the precedent system. The common law system has the precedent system. But as a matter of practice, in fact, the ICJ does refer to several of its prior decisions. Now, obviously, they're not in a binding way, but in fact, they do refer to their prior decisions. And the same with other international judicial institutions. Anybody else? Or if you want to say one more time, because we still have, I can deliver what I have in 30 minutes. Don't you worry about that. I just want to hear from you. It's not me who really matters. You are more important than me. So I want to hear your views.
I think, and another important point that we've mentioned in class, but I think is extremely important when talking about international law, is that it's very much based on Eastern, like Western values, So the colonial aspects of international law, especially with the global South growing, it's very important to be talked about and to be considered with the decision that the ICJ, for example, is making, because as we've talked in Dr. Cordero's class, there's still that sense of kind of colonialism that transcends through the decisions that are carried out in the international system. purely out of the basis that it was created off. So for me, talking about international law, I think every time that I do talk about or read about it, I have to be kind of mindful of that in order to interpret the decisions that are being made.
I think you're right, because although we put forward the idea that international norms, particularly those based in treaties, are a matter of agreement or consent between the nations, in fact, you have to wonder whether some of the countries, particularly those from the global south and probably the east, they have the wherewith in terms of power to really dictate the outcome or really change the trajectory of what will be agreed upon. And to the extent that some powerful nations can have their way one way or the other, you have to really appreciate what you just said, that it's possible that Western values are trumping or they are transcending the wishes, or perhaps they're not in the best interest, always necessarily in the best interest of other nations. So mere consent, we have to go beyond that countries have consented to such norms. In contract law, when I teach contract law, sometimes we do strike down contracts where you have unequal bargaining power. So parties can sign on a contract, the same as treaties, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are equally powerful. Any other comments you might have to bring forth? Yes, please go ahead. I think somebody just needs admission here into the room. So, any other contributions? Any other thoughts on what you think international law? How I will ask you later on, particularly. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, a third element that I kind of associate with international law and thinking about it is the word governance in a way, instead of government, meaning I think one of the problems that when especially students think about international law, we look to it as something that should be very sort of executively strong and be able to implement laws. But I think it's more about governance, allows us to have at least a framework to know what's internationally sort of desirable and what's legally desirable for all the parties. So that's how I kind of see governance in terms of international law.
Yes, so it's not just, I agree, it's not always just about enforcement. And in fact, if you look at the ICJ, they just have a few decisions on their website. If some of you want to take a look, I don't think there are more than 1,000 judicial decisions in so many years that it has been in existence. But really, international law is being used on a daily basis. So countries are interacting, countries are doing business together, even though they are not suing each other. And so it really provides a framework for our interaction. Any other comments?
Yeah. So something that I think of when I think of international law is I think of kind of this, it's really interesting blend of idealism and realism. Because on one hand, you have such like with the United Nations condemning Russia. And they make these votes, and they don't have a lot of physical practical, but it's just very symbolic kind of move. But also on the other hand, you do have things that are very really physical international laws. I mean, with trade and everything. So it's really interesting that you could have something that's signed that's very, very idealistic, and then something in reality that can also happen and occur that could occur in international law. And one of the really interesting things that I always think about in international law is is translations between languages, and I think it's really interesting and different. Like, for example, Native Americans during westward expansion and manifest destiny in the United States would often sign these treaties, and they had no idea what they were signing. Or, they would in Manhattan was bought for like $23 of that, and the Native Americans, didn't believe in owning land. Like they thought it was ridiculous. They said the earth owns the land. So really, when they sold it, they're like, these guys are the biggest idiots ever, because we'll just sell them the land. And then
You better talk carefully, because you may have to pay reparations to these people, right?
Yes. Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
And it's so interesting because you have things like that of all sorts of different things of translation errors between languages of different things that can really mean totally different things in different contexts between languages or between cultures that you interact with. Some things are just customary in some countries, and other things are not customary, and so you can get a lot of these translation errors that occur, especially between the East and the West. That historically have happened a lot because of the West not understanding the context that the East is in, so to speak. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, in a very big way, international law can be idealistic, but also it has a lot of realism to it. So any other comments? Because probably now we should get to this topic, unless somebody is itching and has an idea wants to put forward. We'll get on with this topic. Anybody else? Like I said, it's not about me, it's really about you. Anybody else wants to share an idea? All right. So most of the ideas you've given, again, I'll be reiterating these for the rest of this conversation. And use of force basically falls in there with the norms of international law. You can find them in treaties, you can find them in custom. These are things you guys have talked about. Treaties, one of those which is really fundamental is the United Nations Charter, the Charter of the United Nations. But also international law can be found in custom. It can also be found in norms which are called jus cogens norms. It can also be found in other sources, general resolutions, to the extent they have been there a long time. But I'm talking about those which give evidence to custom. Some people even think norms can be found in natural law. So international law, as the name suggests, is there to facilitate relations between nations, and I think that's why Dr. UK, I think that's what my friend prefers to call himself, would love you to have this conversation about international law as you navigate your course of international relations and political economy, because nations are making these treaties, they are engaging each other and creating custom which will generate norms by which they relate to each other. Where you're at in your syllabus, I understand you are dealing with issues of international organizations as well as the use of force. So I thought I would talk to you about how this whole thing started of use of force. The United Nations Charter exists to promote international peace and security. That is its main goal. But this charter was created in 1940s after the Second World War. So prior to that, in fact, there had been norms which emphasized that you cannot simply attack another country willy-nilly just because you feel you can do it. So you can see there that traditionally there were limits on the use of force, specifically in that you cannot just attack another country unless you have first made a demand for reparations, and that demand has not been met. And if it has not been met, then your response should at least be proportional to the force that was used by the aggressor. You can see that in the Naulila case. I don't know whether some of you have read that case as part of your course, but it doesn't really matter. This happened, I think, between the Portuguese and the Germans in Southwest Africa. So I think, I think there is a chat here. I think somebody is giving us somebody who is a prince, a British royal prince. Jacob, is that Jacob? Jacob Chambers?
Yeah, it's a meme. Sorry, it's
Jacob is a funny man. Just go on with your.
This guy here I'm seeing over here is an interesting guy. He's an internationalist. He lives here in the US. I think you're talking about Prince Harry. Now he lives also in the UK. another internationalist. So anyway, going back to this topic of use of force, you can see that countries are trying to limit the extent to which force can be used. And now there were just two elements to the use of force in the prior slide. That is to say, you have to make a demand for reparations if somebody has attacked the other. Of course, originally, any country thought they could use force as long as they were a nation state. It was part of the attributes of being a great leader. You have to go to war with another country. They thought it was legitimate, but it can be very destructive. So they try to limit the circumstances under which you can go to war. And some of you in our conversation earlier on were like, it's all about power. So these sovereigns just project themselves for whatever reason, maybe to get territory, capture territory from another, or perhaps you have some issue, some dispute. As in this case, I think it was a dispute about they couldn't understand each other and one had gone into the territory of another and they fought, they came to blows. But now we are trying to say, well, if those things, if there's a dispute, if there's a misunderstanding, you do not necessarily have to come to blows. First, make a demand for reparations. And if that demand is not met, then you can respond with what is called a reprisal, something in kind, something similar to what they did. But still, you have to do it in proportion. As in this case, I think only one person was injured, but the response was killing of 6 people on the other side. That is not proportional. So you'll see later on, even under humanitarian law, that when you go to war, you have to use proportionate means. So even before the UN Charter, there was a definition of when you can use self-defense. You cannot now use wars of aggression except in self-defense. Even before the UN Charter, they are saying you cannot resort to the use of force unless this is in response to an armed attack. There has been an attack, and then you are carrying out the response in self-defense. And that's what happened in the Caroline dispute. You can find that, if you can Google that, and the facts will be there online. I think it should be available online, the Caroline dispute. So the attack, there was in fact an attack. And in this case, the court enumerated, or it outlined 6 elements of a justified armed response. There has, first of all, to be an attack, and that attack must be instant, overwhelming, leave you no choice of means, and no moment of deliberation, but the response should be proportionate. Now come the United Nations. Of course, something gave rise to the United Nations. What was it that gave rise to the United Nations, which you still have today? What happened? That the United Nations were created. Yes, go ahead. It was World War II. World War II.
It was the Great Wars. Yeah.
The Great Wars. It was devastating. And so you come up with the United Nations saying nothing in this present charter shall impair the inherent right of self-defense. Article 51 of that. Even though Article 2, Clause 4, had expressly or explicitly prohibited the use of force because of what happened in the Second World War. So no more use of force. It was devastating. In fact, I'm surprised that people are still fighting even today. There was a prohibition of the use of force, but it cannot be absolute. That's why Article 51 of the UN Charter says, nothing in the present charter that tells me, including Article 2, Section 4, which prohibits the use of force. Nevertheless, Article 51 says, even though you have Article 2, which says the use of force is prohibited, it says nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of self-defense, because somebody is going to attack anyway. And that's what is happening even today. People are attacking each other. So we find these norms in a treaty, in this case, the UN Charter, but don't forget that even countries which are not part of the UN Charter could also be bound by what we call customary international law, which, according to this court in the Nicaragua dispute, says self-defense, whether it is individual or unilateral self-defense or collective, in fact, is now recognized as part of customer international. You cannot, self-defense is recognized as part of customer international law. So who can tell me what customer international law really is, as opposed to treaty law?
I can help with that. Customary international law is kind of dependent sometimes on precedents in some way. It's the customs that develop in the international legal system, and we kind of different nations accept it.
Yeah.
While treaty one is more on paper, we agree upon it, it's official, it gets ratified, and so on.
Yes, exactly. So custom, basically certain countries engage in certain practices with a sense of legal obligation. Those are the two elements of customer international law. There has to be some kind of state practice, and all of them are engaging them with a sense of legal obligation. So each of them is like, this is the way we behave, even though it's not on paper, but in fact, they think they have an obligation to behave in a particular way. So if in fact the president of, let's say Malawi, visited the US and they laid out a red carpet for the president of Malawi, he walked on a red carpet, and now next time he comes or she comes, or whatever they say they are, they come, and now the carpet is not laid out. Can they go to an international court and say, look, we are suing because they never laid out the carpet this time? Can Malawi sue the United States for breach of a custom of international law?
No.
No.
Why not?
Why not?
They did lay out the red carpet.
Because even though it's a custom, it will be more like let's say like just how you are acting. So it will be more of your reputation, but they're in theory they are not really reaching. It's not like they are not respecting the immunity of the diplomat. They are just not being extra in that way.
Yeah.
I
So go ahead.
But can they still sue them because customary international law, it's still international law in some ways, even though it is not written on a document?
Mm-hmm. But both elements have to be met. There has to be some sort of practice, doing something, but doing it with a sense of legal obligation. I'm obligated to do this. Now, when the US laid out the red carpet, do you think it had that sense that I'm doing this because I'm obligated to do it? Anybody wants to try?
I think in some ways, yes, because it's kind of a custom in the international law to do that.
So you think they really have to lay out that carpet?
Yeah, in
So
some ways,
they don't walk in the dust. They don't walk in the dust. They basically have to lay out this red carpet.
Because we have made a custom kind of that it's a custom in the international law, not international, but generally when a representation of another country comes, you put that down. So it kind of becomes a custom, right?
Yeah. So your president comes to the US, they lay out a carpet. The president of Malawi walks in the dust, and now he sues, says, I didn't have a red carpet, I was walking in the dust. So you think he has a case at the ICJ, at the International Court of Justice? Malawi has. He walked in the dust.
If there is precedence of a previous case on that matter, then maybe.
I love this argument. We could go on and so forth, but I just wanted to bring that hypothetical to illustrate the fact that if, in fact, let me just put it like that, okay? Respecting your answer. If, in fact, the US did it as a matter of courtesy, good manners, as opposed to I am obligated, it will not constitute customer international law, and it will not be a basis for a lawsuit internationally. So, but if in fact, as you argue, they felt like obligated, this is a real legal obligation, yes, then in that case, you could sue. So unilateral use of force. Of course, anybody who is attacked can defend themselves, right? But they could also invite other people to their defense. As in Nicaragua, somebody was saying, well, the US has come on the side of the Contras, and therefore, you know, they wanted to say this collective self-defense. But in fact, Contras were not a country. It could only be Nicaragua, which could be supported by another country in terms of collective military defense, self-defense. So the US lost that case. Just so you know, the United Nations has got that court called International Court of Justice. It hands down cases like that one, Nicaragua versus the USA. That case was not, the results of that case were not enforced. Who can tell me why that case could not be enforced against the United States? It wasn't enforceable, even though the USA lost it. The USA lost that case, but they couldn't, Nicaragua could not enforce the judgment. Why not?
Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to say that I think that's one of the biggest complications in international systems, that neither the ICJ or the ICC can directly enforce anything or any decisions. They're not actual acting factors that can, you know, kind of give you repercussions if you don't follow with something. And that's why they have certain laws under the Vienna Convention, such as negotiation and good faith. A lot of things is left upon the states to decide how they act it out, because there's just not one legal body that is able to legally enforce a judgment of a court upon a state. And that's why nothing kind of could be done in the case of Nicaragua.
Exactly. So there is no international police force which would enforce these judgments, unfortunately. Now you can go to the United Nations Security Council, but guess what? The US is one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, and it has got what we call a veto over any resolution of the United Nations Security Council. Of course, if the Security Council said we're going to adopt a certain resolution to enforce this judgment, the US would veto it. China can do that, Russia can do that, Britain can do that, France can do that. They are permanent members of the United Nations. And there is a reason they made them permanent members. They were the big powers at the time this charter was adopted. So sometimes also when a country is attacked, you can have the United Nations Security Council adopt a resolution and now ask for, you know, forces from each country to contribute, and then if they demand that the powers that are involved in the conflict stop the conflict, and they do not stop the conflict, sometimes the United Nations Security Council can adopt a resolution, and with those forces contributed by various members of the United Nations, they can go in and restore international peace and security in that country. And that is what we call action of the United Nations pursuant to Article 42 of the United Nations Charter. In fact, that's what happened in 1990 when Iraq attacked Kuwait, a small neighbor. And the UN acted together, and they carried out what you can call Operation Desert Storm. They kicked out Iraq, but that was acting under the powers of the United Nations. Rarely does that happen. Many times, in fact, the United Nations does not come together to restore international peace and security. Now, there has been a number of conflicts in the last decade or so, probably more than a decade, which have brought forward this issue of whether certain types of uses of force and conflicts are also somehow within the ambit of the United Nations. What does inherent right to self-defense really mean? For example, in Rwanda, when a country or an ethnic group, let's say a government, the government decides to eliminate a portion of their own population. In this case, they were eliminating the Hutus, or somewhere in the Baltics. I think we had a friend who was talking about the war in the Baltics. What happened there? In the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. What happened there? I think one of our colleagues said they would help us with this one, and I can't wait for them to help us with this one. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say I'm from Bosnia as well as Imad is. So I think, well, what would you want to know exactly what happened in Yugoslavia?
So was there any part of the state that was involved in, or let me put it like this, was this an internal conflict? Let me put it like that, just an internal conflict.
Internal and regional. Internal because of the fact that, for people that don't know, the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina is divided in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Republika Srpska, and the District Brčko, and it's composed out of 3 nationalities: Bosniaks, who are Muslims, Croats, who are Catholic, and Serbs, who are Orthodox Catholics. Now, there's a difference between a Serb from Bosnia and then, from Serbia, Croat from Bosnia, and a Croatian from Croatia. But everyone was involved in the conflict internally, and then those 2 countries aiding.
Yeah. So internally. Okay. So if a conflict happens go ahead.
I need to clarify a few things here. First of all, Bosnia and Herzegovina wasn't divided into the 3 entities, 2 entities in a district, until following the conflict. So this division came only after the conflict, not before. It wasn't a case in Yugoslavia. It wasn't a case during the war, at least not officially. And then second of all,
it was one country.
Bosnia and Herzegovina is one country who was a non-sovereign state within Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
And then second of all, Bosniak, Serb, and Croats are not nationalities. They are ethnic groups within the country. And this distinction is very important for understanding the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina as is.
Yeah.
Because the ethnicity is the main issue here, and it is the reason why ICJ classified the aggression as a genocide in certain instances.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to point out, though, without going into the internal dynamics and the causes, plus you know better than probably I do what happened there, I just want to highlight that some scholars, some experts saw that as perhaps a conflict which had internal as well as external dimensions. To the extent that it had some internal dimensions, an issue arises whether the rest of the world should just wait and not interfere, or they could interfere under, for example, different theories. One of them is, we just can't wait, for example, until the Tutsis in Rwanda are all killed, and then we say, oh, too bad they were killed. Because, we have a responsibility to intervene because we are all human beings. Now, I don't know whether that's justifiable in the context of the former Yugoslavia, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. I don't know whether it's justifiable, but to the extent that there's a conflict that's happening internally, the question has been wondering whether we could intervene on humanitarian grounds. Some people disagree with that. They say, well, you've not been attacked at all. Why do you intervene? Also, another question that arises is anticipatory self-defense. For example, if you know that, or you have reason to believe that you're going to be attacked, can you attack even before you are attacked? So there's what we call anticipatory self-defense. You can't wait until somebody who has weapons of mass destruction ignites or pulls the trigger, and then you say, okay, I've been attacked, now let me go and attack. And that was what was happening after the 9/11 attack. Should we go and attack certain countries which are supporting those people who are likely to attack us? There was anticipatory self-defense, and in fact, some people even talked about preventative self-defense. Now, preventative self-defense or preemptive use of force is more problematic. Anticipatory self-defense has been accepted as long as the attack seems to be imminent and there is no other way to deflect it, and the action is also proportionate. I think we're almost at almost over our time. When do we stop, Dr. UK? What time is it? I can't hear. Can't hear. Can somebody type it here in the message in the chat?
Class ends at 1:30. Class ends at 1:30.
Oh, so we still have 24 minutes. I'll be a little quicker here so
Yeah.
we can finish these ones. So the United Nations, in fact, has adopted now what we call the doctrine of responsibility to protect. It's a little bit controversial, but it's precisely because of humanitarian crises which have occurred in several countries, in the Baltics as well as in Rwanda. Also, regional organizations have been involved in international peace and security pursuant to Article 53 of the United Nations. That's okay if they are allowed by the UN Charter to intervene. Sometimes they do not allow them to do so, but they go ahead, as NATO did with respect to the bombing campaign in 1999. And that is a problem right there. But that's because there was a massacre which was going on. People were dying. And that's why they say, well, there is a responsibility to protect. This is necessity. So they are like, we do not just have to follow the UN Charter. There are some values beyond the UN Charter, and that's debatable, but that's what has been followed. So, with respect to terrorists or non-state actors, the basis for use of force in this regard is usually if, in fact, there has been a significant armed attack. Of course, usually these are non-state actors and they are resident in some states like Afghanistan. Usually, what the UN Charter is envisaging a situation where it is one state attacking another state. But what if non-state actors are involved? So the use of self-defense doctrine can only be justified if, in fact, there is a responsible state. And of course, there has been an attack, and in fact, the response is to deter the next attack. Even then, the response must be necessary and proportionate. So, for example, you can't continue fighting in Afghanistan forever, even when the threat is over. So we have some current conflicts. So we are done with the theories. We only have 20 minutes, and I would like to hear from you. But we have some current conflicts. One of them is the war in Ukraine. Do you have any ideas as to what we could do to stop the war in Ukraine, or as to what caused it, and why it is so difficult to end it? Does anybody know what's going on and what we could do to stop this war?
Yeah, well, I waited for a second because I have quite not conventional analysis of this in some ways. I think both the West, meaning under the leadership of the United States, and the Russians have a role of where we are here today and what's happening in Ukraine. I think the constant expansion of NATO to the West kind of provoked this attack.
To the east,
sorry. Mm-hmm. And going to the border with Russia, which saw this as a threat, and in some ways they are using the justification that we use of like anticipatory threat or preemptive threat, and they came and invaded Ukraine. But also there are other factors. I mean, Putin is a problem, and the way the Russian leadership is thinking is a problem too. Yeah, that's how I would understand the reasons of it. Yeah,
good. Any other thoughts on this? So 2022, the tanks started rolling over from Belarus into, in fact, it went before, even before that, Russia took over Crimea. And now, last year, it wanted to take over the whole of Ukraine, attacking from Belarus. And the war is ongoing. So even with the UN Charter, conflicts continue. The UN Charter is very clear. You have to respect the territorial integrity of a sovereign state. But it's more than that. It's more than the UN Charter. There's a lot going on, as you heard our colleagues say. They think they are under threat. if they think they are under threat, they think they should use force to repel that threat. What do you think, the rest of you? Well, somebody's answering you. I think somebody was responding to you about Moscow's aggression towards Kiev. You can have that discussion when you are having a little tea later on or coffee, right? But now somebody is taking you on that one. So what do the rest of you think about this war?
Yeah. So for me, for my lens of what I'm looking at in the war of Ukraine, I think of that it was a very realist move to try and grab more power by Moscow, by Russia. I look at the oil lines that run through Ukraine into Europe, and I think overall it was a grab to try and gain territory, and kind of trying to expand its influence and power into Ukraine, kind of weaken the West. I think that's really why they invaded Ukraine. I don't think that NATO or anything provoked the attack necessarily. I think that the Russians are using that point as a talking point, trying to justify it. But I don't believe that there was any sort of attack, because I look at like places like when Russia invaded Georgia and other places. I think it was mostly for a territory economic gain for the country and kind of trying to bolster Putin's power. But I think that it was a real big mistake by Putin and Russia to do that. It's united the West more than ever. They're economically isolated themselves, and they've overall caused lots of problems for their own country. So overall, I think that that's sort of what it was more. It was more of a realist kind of grab at power and trying to influence, and trying to make Russia more of a stronghold around power around the world than it was any sort of attacking before they could attack you. There had been no signs of provocation when they went to the border. So.
And this is an interesting topic. As you can see, we have so many responses. It has impacted the international economy. It has international security implications. Most of you are doing political economy. Look, I am illiterate in terms of political economy, but I'm sure there are linkages between war and international economy. I'm sure there has to be linkages. So unfortunately, we have like 15 minutes, but I just want you to know that some people call this an unprovoked invasion, at least in the West, that's what it is called, precisely because when a country has not attacked another, it may be that the NATO is threatening them, but Ukraine had not yet joined NATO, but it was threatening to join NATO. So maybe that you could say that is the threat. But the West calls it unprovoked, and there has been no collective self-defense unless you say you argue that the supply of weapons and maybe other help is collective self-defense. You can also say that there has been no invocation of the doctrine of necessity. Nobody has intervened. You have to wonder why, but we don't have the time to go into that. Please know that there are other conflicts going on around the world. For example, there is a war going on in Ethiopia. Tigray, right there in the north, basically is fighting with the forces of Ethiopia. I think it's again about power over there. The Tigrayans were in charge of the government for a long time, and they feel excluded, and they are fighting right over there. There is another one in the Congo, which has been ongoing for a long time. And so some of you who are doing international economy, you probably know the role of resources in war. So there's an intersection between resources and war. Basically, Congo has a lot of natural resources. Probably if it was a very poor country, there wouldn't be issues of war over there. It's involving several countries. Uganda, where I come from, is involved now and then. Rwanda is involved now and then. So I can see several comments here which are wonderful. I grew up watching Russian politics, and I can confirm that Russia is always concerned about net expansion. So I can see. Don't forget the armies of Ethiopia, Egypt training for the damming of the Nile. I mean, you all can read these comments. They are wonderful contributions. I like them. Please know that the hotspots are many around the world. Take a look. Israel-Palestinian conflict. It has been ongoing for a long time. So it's not for nothing that we have these norms on the paper. People are dying, and sometimes we want to help those who are in such situations to protect them, perhaps restore peace and international security. There's the conflict in Syria. There's the conflict, I think it is a simmering conflict in Southern Sudan, Central African Republic. There is a simmering conflict there as well. Then there is one between Turkey and the Kurdish armed groups. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is also there. You have the conflict which is ongoing in Somalia because of these non-state actors, Al-Shabaab. You have the war in Yemen, the conflict in Myanmar. It's an internal conflict, but people are dying. You have the potential confrontation between China and Taiwan. Taiwan is arming up, ready to go. The US might be on one side. China is in conflict with neighboring countries because of its claim to certain islands in the South China Sea, claiming them to be territory, even though usually a state has only 12 nautical miles into the sea and not beyond that. Most of the zones of the sea are international territory, but China is laying a claim to several of those islands because they can. So one of you said that, some of these people, when they have power, the law does not matter. The law does not matter. So I just also want to know, I know you've been dealing with international organizations. Some of you may want one day to work in international organizations or intergovernmental organizations. Please know that that's where, in fact, most of international law takes place. The United Nations, there are also regional government organizations. Some of them have a role to play in the use of force. So we are basically done with our discussion of use of force. I know Dr. UK will deal more on this topic with you. I can't finish everything on use of force in one class. I haven't even given you many cases to discuss. We do discuss those when I teach international law. So I had to just go over a few points on the use of force. But I already hinted that regional organizations sometimes have a role to play in international peace and security. One of them is NATO, but even in ECOWAS, for example, in West Africa, sometimes also helps with restoration of peace and international security. But beyond that, they do other things: international human rights, activism, lobbying, resource management, fact-finding and investigation. Some of them are involved in trade, World Trade Organization and stuff like that. If you ever want to do anything related to international law, please know that although international generally will not be enforced by judicial institutions like ICJ, the International Court of Justice, or the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, or the European Court of Justice, or the African Court of Human and People's Rights, or anything else that you may come up like the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, or these tribunals like those which are in the former Yugoslavia enforcing international humanitarian law, or the one for Rwanda, or even regional hybrid courts like those in Sierra Leone. All of those would be purely international. Please know that there are many ways in which you can participate internationally. You can look for jobs at the United Nations Secretariat. You can actually look for jobs in UN agencies. I'm talking of agencies like the World Health Organization, UNESCO, which is for education, the Children Fund, the United Nations Development Program, the Food and Agriculture Organization, International Telecommunications Union, International Atomic Energy Agency, Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the United Nations Environmental Program. You can also, of course, serve one day at any of these courts in case you have a law degree. I'll be in Boise soon. I can teach you law. Once you're done with that, please come. I'll be teaching you law. I teach more than international law. I told you I teach like 7 other courses other than international law. You may meet me in torts. You may meet me in contracts. I'm not trying to hire. I'm just trying to say that, in fact, These are areas which should be open to if you feel inclined, and you can work even without a law degree. Some of the things you can work in, you can work in the World Trade Organization. A law degree helps, but not always. Some of these international organizations don't require a law degree. The UN Children Fund, the United Nations Development Program, Food and Agriculture Organization. There are many. You can be sure the UN Secretary is not full of lawyers. No, it is not. The United Nations is not. You can work in your embassies. You can work in your respective embassies. Several of my colleagues whom I went to school with at Notre Dame for my Master of Laws, some of them are ambassadors. I have them on my Facebook. They have become ambassadors of states. So they don't even need a master's. You can have your law degree, your degree, political economy, international relations. You can work with your embassy. Please do consider international work. Many of these countries are represented. They are not suing each other all the time, but they are using things like international relations, political economy, international law to serve their own populations and also engage with other nations. I'm talking about even some which are not pure law, such as I don't know how many I have here, which are not pure law. But I can tell you that if you go to these websites, there will be very many which don't deal with pure law. The African Union, some are very regional. You don't have to go to the United Nations. Some are very regional. African Union, ASEAN, the Association of South American Asian Nations, the European Union. Just talked about the European Union. There is a commission. Europe has a number of international organizations, not beyond just the European Union. For example, they have the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. There are so many in Europe, and you also have NATO as well. So for a guide to some of these international law jobs or international relations or international political economy, I will just point you in the direction of some of these. These are very helpful. For example, this one over here, right over here, the one which I say is a catalog, as well as the one here, carriers. They have a list which is like 30 pages of single print of jobs available internationally. You can't believe it. Very many jobs. So they are not all suing in the ICJ. They are not all suing or practicing law, but they are doing important international work. And by the way, most of you are younger people. The world is yours. Most of us are likely to die tomorrow, and you will be enjoying these things. So make sure you take these opportunities for yourselves. I want to hear from you in the last 5 minutes or 7 minutes as to what you think you can do with your law, particularly, rather with your degree, particularly as it relates to international relations and possibly international law as well. Tell me what you are thinking. What do you want to do? If you can share with us.
Thank you, Professor, very much. I just wanted to say real quick that while class ends in 6 minutes, we might have another 10 more minutes if Professor is willing to stay on, so they can ask questions related to careers, related to the concept that they want explicated and sort of things. And then we close it off after 40 after. How about that?
And these slides, I'm going to send them to Dr. UK in case you're interested in them. In case he wants you to respond to this talk, maybe write a little paragraph for him. I don't run his class, but I will send this to him, and he can do with them as he pleases. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well,
tell me what. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I want to get a little bit further education and specialize a little bit more in one of the areas of international political economy, and hopefully go back to Iraq, because Iraqi diplomatic capabilities are not very well. Much of our politicians are usually engineers and doctors, and they have just risen to power, and having some people working in it that understand the complexities of international system is important, and I want to do that role in some ways.
Be sure to invite me. I can't wait to visit you in your office in the capital or wherever you'll be serving the country. You really can do this. I think I saw a hand raised earlier on. Yes. Is it Nicole?
Yes, but mine is not about career. It's more about the lecture you just gave. I have a question about you talked about proportionate, and like it's something that, like, I understand the argument about to retaliate or to defend yourself, like it has to be proportionate. But when it comes to human lives, we could say 25 died here, 25 died here, but the I don't know how to explain, but to what extent does that proportionate argument, like the consequences of like human death, or even just like destroying human capital, is like you can't really measure the effect of it. Like the proportionate argument can, like, how legitimate it is in this case. Is it about numbers? Is it about like the quality of the situation? So for me, that's where it got murky for me, because I was confused. I was like, proportionate I
I think
understand, but
I think it is both qualitative and quantitative. So if, for example, there is a soldier of the US who crosses into Mexico and shoots 2 people, and then the US declares a war against Mexico, you know what I mean by proportion there?
yes.
Yeah, so it could be numbers, but it could also be more than just numbers. Most countries, they will not go to full-blown war because one country's forces crossed the border and shot 2 people on the other side. They don't usually do that. So the response has to be proportionate to the attack.
Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? I'm also interested in hearing what you folks want to do with your degrees, particularly as it relates to something that borders on law.
Yeah.
Or international relations, yeah.
Yeah, something that I always found really fascinating was really infrastructure. Is something that's so important for me, really, because I used to work at a city, and something that I really found is that it helps build a society, and if you have good infrastructure, it can really solve a lot of problems. And so I'm really interested in ways of connecting the world. I mean, you can look at like, connecting solar grids across countries, and power grids across countries, sanitary water, and different things like that. It allows countries to become stable, and allows even society. So that's something that I've always really been interested in, and it's kind of not glamorous in the United States, and people overlook it. But to me, when people's toilets flush and they have good water and they have food and that sort of stuff, it tends to seem to bring prosperity rather than
and stability too. Yeah, you are right. And even the internet is precisely because they were able to run cables under the sea. That's infrastructure, so it could be extended to other things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And everything that's just so intertwined between food and everything. And once that, when you have cooperation between countries, you can really come up with some amazing ideas about, when you have minds from all around the world working together, you can create some amazing things that, if we were just in the United States, wouldn't have thought about, because, our culture isn't that way, or, we're so focused on different things. With going back to Native Americans, they used to plant different, the sister crops together, and it would increase yields a ton versus just our monocrops that we have now. And we're starting to use that. And so different cultures have different wonderful ideas.
Fantastic. Now I see we have probably don't even have a minute left. But I would like to thank you folks for just coming to this conversation. I know it is not the best medium talking, like this and looking at a screen, but hopefully when I am Meridian, perhaps one day I will be able to step right there in the class before you. I am more dynamic than you see me here. I write on the board. It's very engaged. So I look forward to meeting you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. I don't know if any of them still have question for you. If you have to leave, you have to leave. But
No, I am here. I am here for the next 10 minutes. And those who want to stay on and continue the conversation, you're very welcome to stay.
yeah, I think they will love that. Particularly, I have a question for you as it relates to discussion of force within the global South. I want to see how international law has been applied in conflicts between states, not internally, in the global South.
So, for example, Congo
Yeah.
and Uganda.
Yes.
So that's one area where the use of force came in, and the U.S. alleged that the Allied Democratic Forces in the Congo were in fact creating instability, and they were threatening the security of Uganda. And Uganda invoked a doctrine of international law called hot pursuit. So they justified their intervention in Congo as being, we are carrying out hot pursuit of those people who were there, and they are threatening our international peace and security. So they went all the way to the ICJ. DRC sued Uganda, and they won. And they won against Uganda, and they won several, I think, millions of billions of dollars. One wonders whether that will ever be enforced, but it has been enforced in situations like that. So that's the global South example. Maybe other people want to ask more questions, but that's an example where it has been used. So yeah, it applies. It applies. There is also the situation in Congo currently. Again, the example of Congo. For example, the United Nations took on certain resolutions. They were able to defeat one of the organizations which was sponsored by Rwanda in Eastern Congo. But of course, other groups then arose. So again, they were acting under the auspices of the UN Charter to come up with a force which combined, which brought together several countries, and they were able to defeat a group which was destabilizing Eastern Congo and creating so many refugees, so many deaths. They were able to take care of that. But then here comes, Rwanda. It seems to be supporting other groups there. And so the war continues there as well. I think you can also think of situations like Myanmar, where some people just overthrew a democratic government, and now they are fighting some groups which don't want that. They don't want that, and so there's civil war there as well. Now, one wonders whether they will ever be able to use international law in that context, because China seems to be supporting one side, and of course, once these big powers say no, the United Nations cannot act. It really cannot act. There is paralysis at that level when Russia is on one side and the USA and other members of the UN Security Council on the other side. You cannot agree. You cannot come up with a solution to use international law to resolve such conflicts. But in others they have, such as in the Congo, the example I gave you. Let me see if there are other questions in addition to yours.
I was wondering if I could ask you really quick, actually, about your work that you're doing at University of Idaho. I'm considering going there this fall for law school. I've been admitted and everything, but one thing that's held me back is I'm really interested in like an international law specialization, and I know University of Idaho doesn't have that specialization. So I was wondering, like, what ways that you do contribute to that area, I guess.
So I am just newly hired.
Okay.
So I've been here at the University of Tulsa as a visiting professor, and I will be a resident faculty, permanent faculty, really. Well, I'm not visiting there. I will be a professor there, and in the fall I'll be teaching torts. So that is civil wrongs. And I'll be also teaching the law of sales, which is a component of the law of contracts. So if you come, you're going to see me perhaps. It depends on which campus you'll be in. If you are in the Boise campus, you'll meet me. In the spring, I will be teaching international law, among other things. So we may meet. Now, I have a colleague, if you go to Moscow, you may meet Professor Pimentel. In fact, he's very much involved with the United Nations This last
okay.
year, he was in fact in a sabbatical, and he's part of some international organizations. So even if you are in Boise, I could connect you to Dr. Pimentel, who teaches international law in the Moscow campus, to make sure we take care of stuff. And you'll be in good hands. Although there is no special program targeting international law, we have people who are teaching international law, and we have some of us who have international connections as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your talk, and I have to go now, but yeah, thank you for answering that for me, and thanks for coming today as well. So, bye.
Absolutely. Bye. Any other questions?
You have
yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Jacob. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I put this question in the comments on there, but I wanted to ask you.
I'm so
I asked,
sorry.
No, you're good. I asked Professor Cadero if he had any good, interesting things about Africa or any places that you know of that you would be good resources. Professor Cadero gave me this wonderful UNESCO documentary that I love to learn more about Africa, but I was wondering if you had any resources that you had that you think would be a good asset to me to learn more about, places in the world that you like to know about.
So you mean places in Africa which you're particularly interested in?
Yeah, I wanted to learn more about their culture, all sorts of things about their history. Because in Idaho, where I was born in Meridian, I was not born in Meridian, but I live in Meridian. We didn't get to talk too much about Africa or anything that you think it would be cool.
I'm going to live in Meridian, and that's where I lived the last. I lived there 5 years. So you see Meridian Road. So I was just off Meridian Road, and I think this was Overland, just in that center where there is a water park. So and there is so that's where I used to live, and I'm going to be living again very close to that area. So who knows? Maybe we can meet with Professor UK sitting between us, and we can have this conversation about Africa. That's where I grew up, although I've lived most of my life really in Idaho. Not most of my life, some of my life in Idaho. So we can really have this conversation. They're fantastic cultures. I mean, coming from the people, their hospitality. Most of the people live in rural areas. Increasingly, Africa is being, urbanized. People live in the cities, but some people are still poor. So you're talking at an agro-based economy. You have got a political system which is parliamentary. You have people do elect. People go to school like we do. Then we have got the natural resources. We have got zoo. We have animals, but that doesn't define Africa. There are just a few zoos which are very natural, but those are very few. So we can have a big conversation about that. We can also have a conversation about the school system there, the healthcare system, how it operates, how people go about their daily lives. These are fantastic things. I still remember going to Notre Dame and a student going to Uganda and coming back and telling me, it is wonderful to visit Uganda. I mean, the hospitality of the people is stomach expanding, meaning wherever he went, he was given food. So, we can talk more about this when I come to Meridian, if you are interested.
Oh, absolutely. That sounds wonderful. And I will get you my contact information to Professor Cadero. And I would love to have a conversation with you to learn more. I think that would be fantastic.
I still have contacts in Africa, and that's what some people fear, that, you can only do this by going there. That's when you learn it best. So I have contacts, and some people don't want to go because they don't know where to begin. Where will I land? Would I have somebody who will show me around? Of course, you'll have tourists and those who are ready to take care of tourists, but also it helps if somebody knows somebody there and say, okay, I've connected you to somebody who can really take care of you. If you are going for an academic endeavor, I am also connected to academics in the National University. So all of those things I can really help you with.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Professor, I want to thank you very much. I'm running out in about 5 minutes. I'm meeting somebody else, so I wish we could have more time to talk. But I'm really grateful for you to come and to educate us on international law. I really enjoyed your lecture, how simplified it was and direct to the message. And I think we will have more of this in the future if you allow.
Certainly, and I think your students know a lot, and that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
I don't want to begin as if they knew nothing, and that's where usually that's how I approach it. And they talked a lot. Almost all of them talked a lot about what they knew about international law. It's not so much about use of force as a topic which you're probably dealing with right now in class, but it's about what they know, and they knew a lot. So I really enjoyed hearing from them.
Yeah, I love the students. This group of students, they're good there, and they always do amazing work. Yeah, they are very suspicious of international law. Some of them are, but they
And
get
you have to acknowledge that there are issues with international law, but imagine a world where we didn't have international law. And they have tried to do that.
Yeah.
They have tried to do that, and it was chaotic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the anyway, yeah, I'm meeting somebody over human resource, so I'm jumping out of this Zoom and joining another one.
All right, right, Dr. Yuke, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'll send you an email later.
Thank you.
All right.
Mm-hmm.